Shortly afterwards, we had to go to another location, which was...
What if I told you that Pierce Brosnan almost lost the role of James Bond because of a legal battle over a forgotten television show? What if the most dangerous stunt in GoldenEye history wasn't performed by a professional stuntman, but by the director's close friend who'd never done action work before? GoldenEye wasn't just Pierce Brosnan's debut as 007. It was a resurrection of a dying franchise that almost never happened, filled with near-fatal accidents, billion-dollar lawsuits, and secrets that the producers buried for decades. From the shocking truth about that damn jump to the real reason Timothy Dalton walked away, we're counting down 20 secrets about GoldenEye that have been hidden since 1995. These revelations will completely change how you watch Bond's greatest modern adventure, so hit that like button if you love 007, and let's dive into the classified files. Number 20. The 6-year gap. Nearly killed the franchise GoldenEye arrived in theaters after the longest gap between Bond films in franchise history, and that 6-year silence almost destroyed 007 forever. After License to Kill underperformed at the box office in 1989, a vicious legal battle erupted between MGM and the Broccoli family over distribution rights and creative control of future Bond films. The lawsuit dragged on for years, with both sides refusing to compromise, effectively holding the entire franchise hostage. During this period, the Cold War ended, the Soviet Union collapsed, and the entire geopolitical landscape that had defined James Bond for 3 decades vanished overnight. Industry insiders believed Bond was finished, a relic of a bygone era with no relevance in the modern world. Studios lost interest in acquiring the property because action films had evolved toward die-hard-style everyman heroes rather than sophisticated spies in tuxedos. The Broccoli family faced immense pressure to sell the Bond rights entirely and walk away, with several major studios offering hundreds of millions for complete ownership. Albert Broccoli refused every offer, maintaining that Bond would return when the legal issues resolved. By 1993, when the lawsuits finally settled, many believed the franchise had been dead too long to revive successfully. The cultural landscape had shifted so dramatically that bringing back a Cold War-era British spy seemed commercially suicidal, which made GoldenEye's eventual success even more miraculous and unexpected. Number 19. Pierce Brosnan was cast 8 years before GoldenEye. Pierce Brosnan was actually offered the role of James Bond in 1986 to replace Roger Moore, but a bizarre contract dispute destroyed his opportunity and haunted him for nearly a decade. After Roger Moore retired, producers tested multiple actors and ultimately chose Brosnan, who'd gained fame playing a suave detective on the television series Remington Steele. The announcement was made publicly, and Brosnan began preparing for The Living Daylights. However, NBC television executives saw the massive publicity surrounding Brosnan's Bond casting and realized Remington Steele still had commercial value. They invoked an obscure clause in Brosnan's contract that gave them the right to produce additional Remington Steele episodes if the show could attract sufficient advertising revenue. NBC suddenly greenlit a new season, and Brosnan's contract legally obligated him to return to the show. Bond producers gave NBC a deadline to release Brosnan from his television obligations, but NBC refused, calculating that keeping Brosnan was worth more than letting him become Bond. Heartbroken, Brosnan had to withdraw from Bond, and the role went to Timothy Dalton instead. For the next 8 years, Brosnan watched 2 Dalton Bond films get made while he remained trapped in television work. When Dalton ultimately decided not to return for GoldenEye, producers immediately returned to Brosnan, who'd been their first choice all along. The 8-year wait made Brosnan's eventual casting feel like destiny correcting a cosmic mistake. Number 18. The opening damn jump was real and nearly fatal. That breathtaking opening sequence where Bond bungee jumps off the Verzaska Dam in Switzerland wasn't CGI or miniatures. It was a real 220-meter freefall performed by British stuntman Wayne Michaels, and it nearly killed him. The dam jump entered the Guinness Book of World Records as the highest bungee jump from a fixed structure ever performed for a film. Director Martin Campbell wanted complete authenticity, refusing to use models or digital effects for Bond's signature opening stunt. Michaels spent 3 months training and calculating the exact bungee cord specifications needed to prevent him from slamming into the dam wall or hitting the water below. The margin for error was less than 2 meters in either direction. On the day of filming, weather conditions were perfect, but Michaels discovered that the dam's air currents created unpredictable turbulence that hadn't appeared during test drops with weights. He decided to proceed anyway because production had already spent hundreds of thousands preparing the sequence. During the actual jump, Michaels experienced violent spinning that wasn't anticipated, causing the bungee cord to twist dangerously around his legs and restrict blood flow. He was suspended upside down for nearly 4 minutes while the crew scrambled to lower him to safety, during which time he nearly lost consciousness from the blood rushing to his head. The entire sequence you see on screen was captured in a single take because Michaels refused to perform a second jump after the near disaster. His bravery created one of cinema's most iconic action moments. Number 17. Sean Bean refused to ride the helicopter.
I'll walk, I'll swim, I'll crawl, I'll do whatever it takes. I'll walk all night to get there by morning, but I'm not.
Sean Bean, who played the traitorous 006 Alec Trevelyan, has a well-documented fear of flying that created serious complications during GoldenEye's production. The climactic battle sequence required Bean to film scenes inside and hanging from a helicopter above the massive Arecibo Observatory radio telescope in Puerto Rico. Bean absolutely refused to get in the helicopter, telling Martin Campbell that he'd rather quit the film than fly in what he considered a death trap. The production faced a crisis because the aerial sequences were essential to the finale, and recasting Bean this late was impossible. Campbell devised a creative solution. They would film all of Bean's helicopter scenes using carefully constructed sets with green screens and strategic camera angles that made it appear he was actually in the aircraft. For wide shots that genuinely required someone in the helicopter, they used a stunt double wearing a mask of Bean's face. However, there was one sequence that absolutely required Bean himself, the moment where Alec dangles from the helicopter's landing gear. Campbell finally convinced Bean to perform this scene by having the helicopter hover only 3 meters off the ground rather than the hundreds of meters depicted in the final film. Camera angles and CGI enhancements made the 3-meter hover look terrifyingly high. Bean's genuine terror in those shots wasn't acting. He was legitimately frightened despite being so close to the ground, which ironically made his performance more intense and believable. Number 16. Famke Janssen nearly broke Pierce Brosnan's ribs. Famke Janssen's portrayal of the deadly Xenia Onatopp, who kills men by crushing them between her thighs, was so intensely physical that she actually injured Pierce Brosnan multiple times during filming. Janssen trained for 6 weeks with a professional wrestling coach and Olympic-level gymnasts to develop the leg strength and technique needed to make Xenia's signature killing method look believable. However, during the sauna fight scene, Janssen applied too much pressure during a take, and Brosnan immediately felt a sharp crack in his ribcage. He didn't want to stop production, so he finished the scene while in severe pain. Medical examination later revealed Janssen had fractured one of Brosnan's ribs and severely bruised 2 others. Brosnan required pain medication and special supportive wrapping for the remaining 6 weeks of filming. What made the injury worse was that Brosnan and Janssen had to complete several additional intimate combat scenes, forcing Brosnan to endure Janssen's powerful legs wrapping around his torso repeatedly despite his injuries. Janssen felt terrible about hurting her co-star and tried to use less force, but Brosnan insisted she commit fully to the physicality because the character's threat needed to feel real. The genuine pain visible on Brosnan's face during these sequences wasn't acting. It was real agony that made Xenia seem genuinely lethal. Janssen later admitted she'd underestimated her own strength and hadn't realized how dangerous her trained legs had become. The injury created one of Bond's most memorable villains, but at a brutal physical cost. Number 15. The tank chase destroyed real St. Petersburg. The legendary tank chase through St. Petersburg wasn't filmed in Russia at all, but the massive destruction it caused was completely real and cost millions in property damage. Production designers recreated several blocks of St. Petersburg architecture in a massive outdoor set built in Leavesden Studios in England, using historically accurate facades and real period vehicles. The production purchased an actual Soviet T-55 tank and modified it extensively for Pierce Brosnan to operate personally. Brosnan underwent 3 weeks of tank operation training with former British Army instructors and insisted on driving the tank himself for most shots. During filming, the tank's enormous weight, over 36 tons, repeatedly broke through the reinforced. Several building facades that were supposed to be preserved for multiple takes were completely destroyed when the tank crashed through them with more force than calculated. The tank's treads also destroyed underground electrical systems and water pipes that weren't properly mapped, causing flooding that shut down production for 4 days. One spectacular sequence where the tank crashes through a building wall went wrong when the structure collapsed asymmetrically, sending debris flying toward the camera crew and forcing everyone to dive for safety. Miraculously, no one was seriously injured, but 3 cameras worth hundreds of thousands of dollars were destroyed. The insurance claims for property damage exceeded £2 million. Despite the chaos and danger, Martin Campbell got some of the most spectacular practical action footage ever captured in a Bond film. Number 14. Judi Dench's casting caused massive controversy. Casting Dame Judi Dench as M, making her the first female head of MI6 in Bond history, created a firestorm of controversy that threatened to overshadow GoldenEye's release entirely. Traditional Bond fans were outraged, claiming that a woman couldn't credibly boss around 007 and that the producers were destroying Bond's masculine identity to appease political correctness. Angry letters flooded into MGM and Eon Productions, demanding Dench be replaced with a male actor, with some hardcore fans threatening to boycott the film entirely. Several prominent film critics wrote editorial pieces arguing that Bond worked specifically because of the father-son dynamic between 007 and his male superior, and that changing M's gender would fundamentally break the franchise's chemistry. Pierce Brosnan received death threats from extremist fans who blamed him for allowing a woman to be cast as his boss. The controversy became so intense that Eon Productions seriously considered recasting the role to avoid negative publicity. However, Barbara Broccoli, who'd recently taken control of the franchise from her father Albert, refused to back down, seeing this as an opportunity to modernize Bond without compromising his essential character. She insisted that Dench's casting would make M more interesting by creating genuine tension between the old-school misogynist Bond and a female authority figure who didn't tolerate his attitudes. When GoldenEye was released, Dench's performance was universally praised, with critics calling her the best M in franchise history. The scene where she calls Bond a sexist, misogynist dinosaur became iconic and silenced most critics. Dench's success proved that Bond could evolve while maintaining his essential appeal. Number 13. The writers based the villain on themselves.
So do I.
You gonna shoot me?
He's now in the finished film.
How's the finished film different from my script? Yes. Well, he would come back.
The character of Alec Trevelyan, a rogue 00 agent who betrays Britain for personal revenge, was based on screenwriters Michael France and Jeffrey Kane's own frustrations with the Bond franchise's outdated Cold War mentality. France, who wrote the original screenplay, was himself a former military intelligence analyst who'd become disillusioned with how intelligence agencies operated during the post-Cold War era. He channeled his own feelings of betrayal and obsolescence into Alec's character, making the villain essentially a dark reflection of what Bond himself might become if he recognized his own irrelevance. Kane, who performed extensive rewrites, added layers of personal bitterness based on his experiences working in British cinema during the 80s, when American blockbusters dominated and traditional British productions struggled for relevance. The writers deliberately made Alec and Bond former partners with identical training and status to symbolize the choice between adapting to the New World Order or rejecting it violently. Many of Alec's speeches about betrayal and obsolescence were taken almost verbatim from conversations France and Kane had about feeling abandoned by the entertainment industry's evolution. Sean Bean understood this subtext and brought genuine anger to his performance, making Alec feel like a legitimate critique of Bond's anachronistic worldview rather than a simple villain. The writers later admitted they'd created Alec partially as wish fulfillment, imagining what it would feel like to burn down the establishment that had discarded them. This personal investment made Trevelyan one of Bond's most psychologically complex adversaries. Number 12. Tina Turner's GoldenEye was rejected. First,
see reflection on the water, more than darkness in the...
Tina Turner's powerful theme song GoldenEye was initially rejected by producers who wanted a more contemporary, edgy sound that would distance the film from classic Bond traditions. Turner's song, composed by Bono and The Edge from U2, was recorded and fully produced months before GoldenEye's release. However, when producers heard the finished version, they felt it sounded too much like traditional Bond themes from the 60s and 70s, exactly what they were trying to avoid to make GoldenEye feel modern and relevant. They commissioned multiple alternative theme songs from contemporary artists, including Pulp, Ace of Base, and Saint Etienne, hoping to find something more aligned with mid-90s musical trends. Focus groups were conducted where test audiences heard different theme options paired with GoldenEye's opening title sequence. To everyone's surprise, audiences overwhelmingly preferred Tina Turner's rejected version, finding the alternative songs too jarring and inconsistent with Bond's identity. The focus group results forced producers to reconsider their modernization strategy. They ultimately realized that completely abandoning Bond's musical heritage would alienate the core fan base while failing to attract new audiences who had no attachment to the character anyway. Turner's theme was reinstated, and it became a massive hit, reaching number 10 on the UK charts and earning critical acclaim. The song's success validated the decision to honor Bond's traditions while updating other elements. Interestingly, several of the rejected alternative themes were later leaked online and became cult favorites among Bond fans who appreciate their experimental nature. Number 11. Izabela Skorupko, nearly drowned. During the yacht scene, Polish actress Izabela Skorupko, who played computer programmer Natalia Simonova, came terrifyingly close to drowning during the climactic yacht destruction sequence. The scene required Skorupko to be trapped in a flooding cabin as the yacht sank, then swim underwater to escape before the vessel exploded. Skorupko was a competent swimmer, but had no specialized training for underwater stunt work. During rehearsals in a controlled tank, everything went smoothly, giving Skorupko confidence for the actual shoot. However, when filming the real scene in open water off the Bahamas coast, Skorupko's costume became entangled in debris inside the sinking yacht set. She panicked and began struggling, which consumed her oxygen faster and caused her to become disoriented. Safety divers were positioned nearby but couldn't immediately reach her because of the narrow passages in the yacht's interior. For approximately 45 seconds, an eternity underwater, Skorupko was genuinely trapped and drowning while cameras continued rolling, with the crew unaware of the emergency. A safety diver finally reached her and provided an emergency respirator, then cut away the tangled costume material to free her. Skorupko was pulled from the water in severe distress, coughing up seawater and shaking from shock and oxygen deprivation. Filming shut down for 3 days while Skorupko recovered, and producers investigated what went wrong. The incident led to major changes in how underwater sequences were filmed for future Bond productions, with mandatory additional safety personnel and emergency protocols that hadn't existed before. Number 10. The Arecibo Observatory almost banned the production. The massive Arecibo Observatory radio telescope in Puerto Rico, where GoldenEye's finale takes place, nearly refused to allow filming after discovering the script's climactic destruction sequence. When producers first approached the observatory's directors for permission to film, they presented a sanitized version of the script that downplayed the explosive finale. Observatory officials were excited about the international publicity and granted access. However, when the full crew arrived with pyrotechnics and stunt equipment, scientists realized the production intended to depict their beloved research facility being blown to pieces. The observatory's board held an emergency meeting and threatened to revoke filming permission immediately, arguing that depicting the destruction of such an important scientific landmark would damage public perception and potentially affect future funding from Congress. Production faced a crisis with millions already spent on Puerto Rico logistics. Martin Campbell personally met with the observatory directors and promised that the film would include on-screen text clarifying that Arecibo remained operational and vital to scientific research. He also agreed to donate a portion of the film's profits to the observatory's educational programs. This compromise saved the production, though several scientists remained unhappy about their facility being portrayed as a villain's lair. Number 9. Pierce Brosnan's driving license was suspended.
Right, now pay attention, 007. First, your new car. BMW, Agile 5 forward gear.
Pierce Brosnan didn't have a valid driver's license during most of GoldenEye's production because of a bizarre traffic violation in Los Angeles months before filming began. Brosnan had accumulated multiple speeding tickets over several years, and California's DMV finally suspended his license for 6 months, just as GoldenEye. Productions filming on public roads in the UK and other countries required all drivers, including actors, to hold valid licenses for insurance purposes. The production had to hire professional stunt drivers to perform every driving shot, even simple scenes of Bond cruising normally. Whenever you see Bond driving in GoldenEye, it's either a stunt driver or Pierce Brosnan operating vehicles on private property where licenses weren't required. For close-up interior driving shots, they built a car rig on a trailer that was towed while Brosnan pretended to drive. The production kept this secret because revealing that James Bond couldn't legally drive would have been embarrassing publicity. Brosnan later joked that his license suspension made him appreciate stunt drivers more, and he sent personalized thank you gifts to every driver who covered for him during production. Number 8. The movie's budget doubled mid-production. Production budget spiraled completely out of control, ballooning from an initial $60 million to over $120 million by the time filming completed. The budget explosion occurred because producers consistently underestimated how expensive modern action filmmaking had become after the 6-year hiatus. The tank chase alone consumed over $18 million, more than the entire Bond film's cost in the 70s. Extensive reshoots were required when test audiences found the original ending anticlimactic, adding another $12 million in unplanned costs. The decision to film in multiple international locations, including Monaco, Russia, Switzerland, and Puerto Rico, created logistical nightmares that quadrupled transportation and accommodation costs. MGM executives panicked as budget reports showed the film heading toward financial disaster before a single ticket was sold. They considered shutting down production multiple times, but ultimately decided that abandoning a half-finished Bond film would be even more expensive than completing it. Barbara Broccoli had to personally negotiate with MGM's board, promising that GoldenEye would be the franchise relaunch that justified every dollar spent. The financial pressure became so intense that several crew members went unpaid for weeks, while accountants scrambled to secure additional funding. When GoldenEye ultimately grossed over $350 million worldwide, it vindicated the massive budget and saved the franchise from potential bankruptcy. Number 7. Robbie Coltrane improvised Zukovsky's entire personality. Scottish actor Robbie Coltrane was given only 3 pages of script for his character, Valentin Zukovsky, a Russian arms dealer. The writers provided basic plot information, but virtually no personality or character details. Coltrane arrived on set and decided to completely improvise Zukovsky's entire persona, creating one of GoldenEye's most memorable characters through pure, spontaneous invention. The flamboyant Russian accent, the walking stick, the nightclub setting, the caviar obsession, all of these iconic elements were Coltrane's improvisations during his first day of shooting. Martin Campbell was so delighted with Coltrane's unexpected choices that he rewrote subsequent Zhukovsky scenes to expand the character's role. The famous line, Walther PPK 7.65mm. Only 3 men I know use such a gun. I believe I've killed 2 of them, was improvised on the spot. Pierce Brosnan struggled to keep a straight face during takes because Coltrane kept adding unexpected comedic flourishes. Coltrane based Zhukovsky's personality on a real Russian nightclub owner he'd met years earlier in London, combining that person's mannerisms with his own comedic instincts. The character became so popular that producers brought Zhukovsky back for The World Is Not Enough. Coltrane's improvisational genius transformed what was written as a forgettable minor character into a fan favorite who nearly stole the entire film. Number 6. The producers couldn't afford the original Q Desmond Llewellyn.
Morning, Q. Sorry about the leg. Skiing?
Hunting.
Who'd played Q in every Bond film since From Russia with Love, almost didn't appear in GoldenEye because producers couldn't initially afford his salary demands. After the 6-year gap, Llewellyn's agent argued that Q had become one of Bond's most beloved characters and demanded a salary increase from £25,000 to £200,000 per film. The massively inflated budget meant producers had little money for supporting cast, and they seriously considered eliminating Q entirely or recasting with a cheaper, unknown actor. Test audiences who viewed early rough cuts without Q scenes reacted negatively, saying the film felt incomplete without Bond's traditional gadget master. This feedback forced producers to find money for Llewellyn. They restructured contracts with other supporting actors, reducing their fees to create room in the budget for Q. Llewellyn agreed to a compromise salary of £100,000 plus a percentage of merchandise sales featuring Q. His reduced screen time in GoldenEye, only about 6 minutes total, reflected the budget limitations. Despite minimal appearance, Llewellyn's presence reassured longtime fans that GoldenEye honored Bond traditions while modernizing other elements. Llewellyn continued playing Q through 3 more Brosnan films until his tragic death in 1999, making GoldenEye his successful comeback after nearly losing the role to financial constraints. Number 5. Martin Campbell had never seen a Bond film director.
Twice the size of this room. And how someone picked that up, threw it over the fence and took it away, I'll never know, but it certainly disappeared. And
Martin Campbell was hired to helm GoldenEye, despite never having watched a complete James Bond film in his entire life. Campbell was a successful television director known for crime dramas, but had zero experience with big-budget action spectacles or franchise filmmaking. When producers approached him about directing, Campbell honestly admitted his Bond ignorance. Surprisingly, producers saw this as an advantage rather than a liability. They wanted someone without preconceptions, who wouldn't simply copy previous Bond films. Barbara Broccoli believed fresh eyes could revitalize the franchise better than a lifelong Bond fan who might be trapped in nostalgia. Campbell spent 3 months watching all 16 previous Bond films in chronological order, taking extensive notes about what worked and what felt dated. His outsider perspective led to crucial decisions like casting Judi Dench as M and emphasizing Bond's emotional vulnerability. Campbell questioned every traditional Bond element: the vodka martini, the gun barrel sequence, the James Bond introduction, forcing producers to justify why each tradition deserved preservation. This critical approach stripped away outdated elements while retaining essential Bond DNA. Campbell's inexperience meant he approached action sequences from a thriller director's mindset rather than trying to outdo previous film spectacle. His fresh perspective revitalized Bond for modern audiences while respecting the character's heritage, proving sometimes the best person to save a franchise is someone outside its cult. Number 4. The satellite weapon was based on real Soviet technology.
Check it.
The GoldenEye satellite, an orbital electromagnetic pulse weapon, wasn't science fiction, but based on actual Soviet weapons research that American intelligence discovered after the Cold War ended. Screenwriter Michael France learned about these programs while working as a defense analyst and incorporated classified information into the screenplay. The Soviet Union had genuinely developed prototype EMP weapons designed to disable American military communications and electronics from orbit. When GoldenEye's script circulated in Hollywood, several defense industry consultants contacted MGM, warning that the film revealed classified information about weapon systems that weren't supposed to be public knowledge. The U.S. Department of Defense requested a review of the script, concerned it might compromise national security or provide technical information to potential adversaries. After tense negotiations, the DoD allowed the film to proceed after producers agreed to fictionalize specific technical details about how the EMP weapon functioned. The satellite's appearance and many operational details shown in the film were deliberately altered from the real Soviet designs. However, the basic concept, an orbital platform delivering electromagnetic pulses to disable ground-based electronics, was frighteningly authentic. Former Soviet scientists later confirmed that their programs had developed functional prototypes but abandoned them due to costs and international treaties. GoldenEye's prescient depiction of cyber warfare and electronic weapons made it remarkably ahead of its time, predicting military concerns that became reality decades later. Number 3. Pierce Brosnan hated the BMW product placement.
Welcome, please fasten seatbelt.
Pierce Brosnan loudly and repeatedly complained about GoldenEye's BMW product placement deal, calling it a betrayal of James Bond's identity and values. Bond had driven Aston Martins for decades, and Brosnan felt the switch to BMW destroyed the character's British sophistication. The product placement deal was worth over $12 million, which cash-strapped producers desperately needed to complete the film. BMW provided vehicles, promotional support, and paid for the prominent placement of their Z3 Roadster throughout marketing materials. Brosnan argued passionately that Bond driving a German car was culturally wrong and that audiences would reject the change. He refused to say positive dialogue about the BMW, forcing writers to rewrite lines making Bond ambivalent about the vehicle. In the film's final cut, Bond barely interacts with the Z3, and it receives almost no screen time compared to his tank, which Brosnan preferred. In interviews promoting GoldenEye, Brosnan openly criticized the BMW deal, saying he'd fought to keep Aston Martin but was overruled by financial realities. His public complaints embarrassed BMW and MGM, straining relationships. Despite Brosnan's objections, the BMW partnership continued through 2 more films before producers finally returned to Aston Martin. Brosnan later admitted the BMW controversy taught him to choose his battles, as his very public dissent accomplished nothing except creating negative publicity. Number 2. The entire film was almost shot in virtual reality. In a stunning revelation that emerged decades later, producers seriously considered shooting GoldenEye primarily using early virtual reality technology and motion capture, making it essentially an animated film disguised as live action. In 1993, James Cameron's experiments with digital filmmaking and early CGI convinced several executives that virtual production could slash costs dramatically. A visual effects company pitched Barbara Broccoli on creating digital environments and using motion capture suits for actors, eliminating expensive location shoots and dangerous stunts entirely. The company produced test footage showing Pierce Brosnan's digital double-performing stunts in completely computer-generated environments. The tests looked primitive by modern standards but seemed revolutionary at the time. Broccoli seriously considered the approach because it promised to solve GoldenEye's budget crisis and production delays. However, cinematographer Phil Mayhew convinced her that audiences would reject a virtual Bond film, arguing that 007's appeal came from genuine exotic locations and real practical stunts. The decision to shoot traditionally rather than virtually was made only 3 months before principal photography began. If producers had chosen the virtual production path, GoldenEye would have looked completely different and likely failed commercially, as audiences weren't ready for that technology. The abandoned virtual production concept was 2 decades ahead of its time, predicting techniques that films like The Mandalorian finally made viable decades later. Number 1. GoldenEye saved MGM from bankruptcy.
James Bond.
The most important secret about GoldenEye is that its success literally saved MGM Studios from complete financial collapse and bankruptcy. By 1995, MGM was drowning in debt with over $1 billion owed to creditors and no successful franchises generating reliable revenue. The studio had gambled its future on GoldenEye, borrowing heavily to fund production while praying the film would revive the dormant Bond franchise. If GoldenEye flopped, MGM would have been forced into bankruptcy liquidation, selling its assets, including the entire James Bond library, to satisfy creditors. Studio executives privately admitted they had no backup plan if the film failed. The enormous pressure helps explain why producers made controversial decisions like the BMW product placement and Tangerine Dream-style electronic soundtrack elements. They desperately needed any additional revenue sources. When GoldenEye opened to massive box office success, earning $350 million worldwide, it single-handedly rescued MGM from financial oblivion. The film's success allowed MGM to renegotiate its debts, secure new financing, and rebuild itself as a viable studio. Without GoldenEye's triumph, there would be no Tomorrow Never Dies, no Casino Royale, no modern Bond films whatsoever. The entire franchise's survival depended on Pierce Brosnan's successful debut. This makes GoldenEye not just a great Bond film, but the most consequential entry in franchise history, the one that ensured James Bond would continue for future generations. And there you have it, 20 explosive secrets about GoldenEye that prove Pierce Brosnan's debut saved more than just the franchise. Which revelation shocked you most? Drop your thoughts in the comments, smash that like button, and subscribe for more spy secrets. Until next time, stay shaken, not stirred.